Crossovers are red hot. In fact, the three on my right each sell over 200,000 units a year, making them one of the most popular cars you can buy in America. And that of course includes the Honda CR-V, the Toyota RAV4, and the Ford Escape. And of course the question we're going to answer in this video is, how does a brand new 2019 Jeep Cherokee compare to the best sellers in this segment? Well, only one way to find out, and that is to take them for a ride, and that is coming up, you know it, right now. You know, it's not easy to get four cars that directly compete against each other. So when Jeep flew me out here to beautiful California to test drive the new Cherokee, and they provided us with three competing vehicles, I knew I had to jump all over this opportunity to compare them. So let's start with the Honda CR-V. Luckily, I've got a big Monroney for the Honda right here. Of course, it's got a 1.5 liter direct injected 4-cylinder turbo that puts out 190 horsepower. It is paired to a CVT, and you know what I think about those. And as tested, this CR-V is $29,325. It also gets 29 mpg combined. Alright guys, I'm behind the wheel of the Honda CR-V, and this is the EX model, and yes, there's a volume knob. How retro is that? And I gotta tell you, I'm impressed just by how honest and well engineered this car is. This is one of the reasons this is one of the best sellers in this segment. Honda just does a really good job in coming up with thoughtful ways and thoughtful design that people use their cars. Well, let's start with this gear shift selector. It's up here, it's up high, it's easy to get to, comes to hand easily, and it frees up all this room for cup holders and extra cubby holes and storage. Everything I look at feels expensive, even though at just around $30,000, this is right in line with the other cars. There's no sense of cheap plastics. Even this, what I suspect is imitation real wood, looks real, not like imitation. The controls are straightforward, laid out. The steering is direct and responsive. I am missing a huge panoramic sunroof, but I can live without that. And my view over the hood is actually really good. I can see where the corners of this car are, both front and back. And over the years, the CR-V has gotten to be quite a big vehicle. At one point in time, it was kind of a small crossover, but now this is a full-on family truckster, and it does exceptionally well in terms of utility. I feel like I have plenty of shoulder room, I have plenty of headroom, even though I have a relatively smallish sunroof. I like the seating position. I do like the fact that even though I'm in a very tight space here with another Cherokee coming up the hill, I was able to see where my corners were. Honda just does a really good job in designing the basics of a vehicle, and they really kind of think about the way that people use them, and then they engineer a car based around that. So they know that this is a vehicle that's going to get used as a family truckster, and for that, it's almost ideal. I've sat in the back, plenty of room in the back, but here's the question. How's the CVT? I'm not a big fan of CVTs because they're good for fuel efficiency, but they're not really great for that. There's not a lot of power, and then when the power does come on, it still feels kind of rubber bandy. There's kind of this sense of like, ugh, and then there's the power. Let's try it again. And then there's the power. So once you get into that kind of meat of the bandwidth of the engine and the turbo kicks in, it does well, but before then, not so much. The steering is light, but feel, I'm not sure there is any. And overall, this vehicle feels like something that you'd want to take to school or to work. Now, will it go off-road? Yeah, it'll go off-road. We've taken this up Goldmine Hill and it does well, but when the going gets really rough, I suspect that you'll probably want something more like a Jeep, because the approach and departure angle, the breakover angle, tires, this is all designed for daily use and not daily dirt use. But you know what, I'm kind of hustling it around these turns, and it is surprisingly well sorted. Now This brand new 2018 Toyota RAV4 comes with a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder that puts out 176 horsepower and 172 pound-foot of torque. Its MSRP is $30,127 and it gets a 25 mpg combined. And maybe that's because it has a more traditional 6-speed automatic transmission. Here we go, I'm in the Toyota RAV4, the XLE model. And this one, once again, competes with the other 4 cars. It is all-wheel drive. It's not the Adventure, which is of course the more off-road worthy one, but let's face it, the Adventure is more of an appearance package than necessarily any true off-road ability. So let's see how this compares to the Honda that I was just in. Immediately, you feel like there's just a little bit less space in here. It's not quite as airy. It's a little bit more driver-centric. It's a little bit more sporty. You know, Toyota has recently decided that their designs were a little too staid, a little too stodgy, and so the company as a whole has been building vehicles that are much more expressive. Now, whether you like that design language or not, I'll leave it up to you. But certainly the vehicle now is, at least from a styling perspective, a lot more extroverted than introverted. So overall, this drives a lot smaller than the Honda, and that's because it is a lot smaller. It's more tossable, it's more nimble, it's a little bit more traditional, especially with the 6-speed automatic transmission versus the CVT. I wish I could say that this was a Goldilocks review. You know, this one's too small, this one's too big, and of course, this one's just right. But this segment is so competitive that all these vehicles benchmark each other, so they are very similar in what they give you, at least in terms of utility. That's a much more traditional way to accelerate a vehicle. There isn't that rubber band feel that you get in the CR-V, but then again, there isn't a huge amount of power that's coming through. Now, this is a lot more tossable, it's a lot more nimble. I think the ride is actually a little bit better, especially when it comes to carving corners like this. I have a sense of more control, more tidiness. I can place the car where I want it to. The suspension is doing a little bit better job. Well, there, got a little unsettled. And this has a really nice interior layout, but once again, much more traditional. No electronic gear cluster here, just a tachometer and a speedometer with a little bit of MPG information thrown in. Steering wheel is nice and small, nice and nimble. It kind of represents what this car actually is. I really like this RAV4, but it almost feels like it's of a previous generation. As you know, automakers always like to increase the size of their vehicles with every generation, give them a little bit more room, give you a little bit more value for your money, and in a way that's true because that's exactly what these cars are. This 2018 Ford Escape has a 1.5 liter EcoBoost turbo under the hood. Of course, it's a 4-cylinder. It puts out 179 horsepower, and it is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission. Now, it gets a 24 mpg combined rating on the Monroney, and it directly competes with these other 3 cars. I'm behind the wheel of the Ford Escape, and I've got a key instead of a push-button start, which should tell you kind of that this is one of the older vehicles in the comparison. Now, I was at the launch of this vehicle, so I remember when this first came out, I remember this kind of interior layout and thinking to myself, this looks very European, very modern. And I gotta tell you, it's kind of aged well, but it has aged. It feels now like this car comes from a different generation of vehicles. Here, the elephant skin is soft, but there are a lot of kind of plastics in the vehicle. But having said that, of course, this car was jointly developed by Ford to be a world car, so it should have the most European road manners of the 3. Overall, the interior is a little dour. It's kind of a sea of black. I don't have a sunroof, of course. I don't have as much space. There is a little bit of light coloredness in the back of the seat, which kind of brightens it up. But overall, there is a sense of, you know, a sea of different plastics that the other vehicles don't have at about the same price point. Now I do like the styling of this vehicle. It does feel the most European to me. So there's kind of the swept back look of it that I've always found rather handsome and attractive. And even though it's been around a while, this vehicle still does sell really well. Like I said, this sells hundreds of thousands of units every year, and that's saying a lot. Isn't a question of the tide rises all boats? I don't think so. I think Ford has done a really good job in bringing a car that their customers like and their customers expect to this segment. Now, is it fast? Well, let's find out. Of course, I have it in sport mode, because if you're going to drive this in a canyon, you might as well have it in sport mode. Turbo's a little perky. Not bad. I almost feel like I can drift this around these corners. This certainly is the most tossable of all three, and that may be because it's one of the smallest of all three, but there's certainly kind of this European sense of ride and handling. And what I mean by that is I have a little bit of sense of what the front wheels are doing. There's a little bit of communication coming through, and like coming up and over that turn, the suspension didn't get all discombobulated. The brakes are strong and progressive. Engine is a little droney, but in general, it's doing a very good job of handling these corners. At just under $30,000, this is one of the least expensive cars in this group, and you guys might be wondering, well, why don't you ever talk about the fact that, you could go to the dealership and get this car at a discount, because your local dealership may be doing that, and the Jeep, since it's brand new, probably won't be discounted. That's a valid point, but it introduces kind of this apples and oranges comparison that we really can't do, because it really depends on the dealership, on the part of the country you live, on any given month. And so, in general, we just like to stick with what's on the Monroney, and then let you guys figure out what the best deal is out there for you. I thought I'd answer that question because I'm thinking to myself, that's one of the comments that we're going to get. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear what you think, is a better way to address that, because let's say that even though this Monroney is $30,000, you can go to your dealership and get this for $25,000, whereas the Jeep is $33,000, and it will be $33,000 at your local dealership. How do we address that? Let us know in the comments below. Now you can get a 6-cylinder under the hood of the Cherokee, but I wanted to test this one because it's the brand new 2-liter turbo. Puts out 270 horsepower and get this, 295 pound-foot of torque. And it is of course mated to a 9-speed automatic transmission. Now of course what makes this interesting is the fact that, well, for one, it's the most expensive vehicle in this group at over $33,000, but I suspect it's also one of the fastest. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am in the Jeep now. Keep in mind, this is a 2019 and the other vehicles are 2018s. Why is that? Well, because this is brand new and it's been refreshed. Jeep likes to come out with a 2019 model, even though it's 2018. Yeah, it's crazy for all you Europeans, but that's the way we roll here in America. So deal with it. I like the styling changes they made to this car. Before it had kind of those big round headlights at the bottom, and then those little squinty lights at the top, and the big round headlights were actually the main headlights, and the squinty lights were the DLRs, the daylight running lights. And now they've of course put the DLRs on top. Those big round lights have become small little fog lights, and the main kind of squinty lights have gotten bigger, and it has become just much more mainstream. I think that's a good thing. It's a 9-speed automatic, and that did hurt Jeep when the vehicle first came out, because it was one of the earliest 9-speeds to come out, and they had all kinds of issues with actually pairing and sorting the algorithm that shifted gears to the vehicle, and it would shift in really weird places. There were like strange downshifts, strange upshifts. And a little bit of interesting trivia for you, the turbo is actually built on the same architecture as the 2-liter turbo in the Alfa Romeo Giulia. So there you have it. I can see the comments now. I bet you guys are wondering which of these vehicles is the most reliable, which one is the best in terms of long-term reliability. But we don't do long-term reviews, at least not yet. But we're trying to get long-term cars so that we can actually see how these vehicles stand up over a year, and that is coming hopefully soon on TFL. Oh yeah. Oh, this is by far the fastest. Going around this turn, I'm already exceeding what both vehicles, actually all three vehicles, were doing before. Yeah, this is night and day difference, at least in terms of power delivery. There's very little turbo lag. There's almost instant throttle response. The car is actually really buttoned down. I didn't get upset at all going over that. And the engine note is quite pleasant. The interior, it's always been very nice. Once again, we've got kind of soft elephant hide plastics. The stitching, while not as expressive as the RAV4, is still nice. I do like the fact that everything is laid out really well. This feels, from an interior standpoint, very American. Everything's kind of big, bold, and overstated. Now has Jeep done enough to be competitive in the most competitive of crossover segments? You know, they've done a lot of smart things which will help. So for instance, the hood is now aluminum, the tailgate is a composite, and overall this vehicle has lost 150 pounds. And when a vehicle gets lighter, it gets faster, and it gets more nimble, and it gets more fun to drive. They've also made it a little bit more maybe off-road worthy by redesigning the rear differential. And if you get the Trailhawk version, this is actually the only car in the segment that has a locking rear differential, has a very low and usable crawl gear, and of course has all the off-road goodies that you would want. But for me, kind of the cherry on top of a Cherokee has always been the fact that it has that 7-slotted grille in the front. And I would be remiss if I didn't do a full disclosure in saying that I'm just a big fanboy of Jeeps. I love going off-road, and it's one of the few brands that actually can go off-road and go seriously off-road. So if even a little bit of that off-road DNA is in this Cherokee, then it's the vehicle that probably would put the biggest smile on my face, simply put, because a guy who lives in Colorado, and as a guy who ends up going to where the road ends and the dirt begins, so I do want that off-road goodness, that off-road ruggedness, and that Jeep heritage. Let's sum this up in a few words. The Jeep is of course the most off-road worthy. The Escape in some ways is getting old, but it's the most perky, the most sporty, the most, in a way, on-road worthy. The RAV4, the most user-friendly. It's the do-all vehicle, and of course, the CR-V in my mind is the most family-friendly. It has the most utility. It's the vehicle that, if you have kids and dogs and such, might be right for you. And it really depends on what mid-size crossover you're looking for to meet your family needs. As always, this is Roman reporting for the Fast Lane Car. Check out tflcar.com for more news, views, and of course, mega 4-vehicle mashup reviews. See you guys next time. Ciao. Let's talk about the mid-size crossover segment. Why is this so popular? Once upon a time, we all used to buy sedans. Camry, the Accord, that's quickly being replaced. Nissan Rogue outsells the Nissan sedans. And I think the reasons for that are obvious. Not only do you get a lot more utility in a crossover, you get a little bit more height so you can see over the top of other cars, unless of course they're all crossovers. You also get all-wheel drive, which means that there is a sense of safety and security. You get the ability to have a vehicle that's kind of the Swiss Army knife of cars. It does everything sufficiently well enough that it gives you everything you need and nothing you don't. And I think that's why crossovers have become so popular. The one thing that strikes me immediately when I get behind the wheel of any of these vehicles is just how similar they are. I think what happens is when you have a car that is so competitive with the other vehicles in the same segment, automakers tend to benchmark each other, and you end up kind of having this confluence of design, utility, and almost powertrains, because it's such a highly competitive and highly profitable market. So nobody wants to come out there and rock the world with something crazy. Instead, they all kind of go for the meat of the market, and then they build a car, design a car that they think will appeal to the most people. And when you do that, you end up with vehicles that are remarkably similar and in some ways remarkably boring. I'm not saying these cars are boring, but if you want a little bit of lead in your pencil, you're probably looking at the wrong segment.